Hmm, Seems like the refrigerator isn't keeping things as cool as it used to. What's the problem? I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley Podcast, I share what happened when our fridge stopped working. It took us a while to figure out that the problem wasn't in the fridge. Here's what to look for. And speaking about the refrigerator, are you trying to go longer between trips to the grocery store? Or thinking ahead to when you're cruising and needing to go longer? It's a learned skill, especially when you have a small refrigerator too. Join my online course, Eating Well with a Tiny Fridge, to learn exactly how I go 3 weeks or more between shopping trips with a very small refrigerator, yet we eat well with all the foods we want. I'm talking real foods. You can go through the course whenever you want and refer back to the materials forever. And better yet, right now you can pay what you can. The full price of $19, half price, or even get it free. Okay, let's talk about your refrigerator. You reach in it for a cold drink and think the cans don't quite feel as cold as usual. You write it off to just not remembering when you put them in, or the fact that it's a really hot day, or that you just put in a lot of warm stuff in the refrigerator. Whatever. But a little later, you go to get something else out. You can't deny the fact. It's not as cold in there as it should be. Maybe the frost on the chill plate is melting. Maybe things in the freezer are thawing. Uh-oh. And your first thought is that it's a problem with the refrigerator. Well, duh. The refrigerator isn't keeping cold, so it's obviously a problem with the refrigerator. You start by pulling out the owner's manual, any repair books you have, or maybe you proceed straight to the big guns and call the refrigerator technician. All of those happened to us. The refrigerator had been working just fine, and the weather hadn't suddenly turned hot, nor was there any obvious explanation for the problem. So we assumed that the refrigerator needed to be recharged. We read up on the procedure, borrowed gauges, and proceeded to do it. No improvement. We then decided that the problem was beyond us and called in the refrigerator repairman. He figured that we had added too much refrigerant, so evacuated it all and then recharged it, leaving us with instructions on how to let out a tiny bit more gas if it still wasn't cooling right. And he told us to allow 24 to 48 hours for everything to settle out. 2 days later, it was obvious that the refrigeration was worse, not better. And now the refrigerator was running literally all the time and eating up every bit of power we had. Normally, our solar panels could keep up with our power needs, but now they weren't. We were having to run the engine a couple of hours a day. And so we just turned the refrigerator off, except when we were actually testing something on it. Drinks went into a cooler, and luckily we were anchored in a town and could get ice. And we otherwise lived without refrigeration. That's when we had the big revelation. Even without the refrigerator on, our batteries were drained overnight. While the solar panels were putting power into the batteries weren't holding the charge, and the voltage was down most of the day. So how did this affect the refrigerator? Well, with low voltage, the compressor didn't operate efficiently, and thus the box didn't cool as well. The thermostat kept saying that the box wasn't cool and told the compressor to run longer. The compressor running longer took more battery power and dropped the voltage still further. And the spiral downward continued. 3 days later, we had new batteries. And a few hours later, we had a cold beer from the refrigerator. It was fantastic. The moral of the story? If your refrigerator isn't as cold as it was, and is running more and more with no apparent cause such as suddenly hotter weather, it might not be a problem with the refrigerator, but with your batteries. And after the fact, we discovered that the troubleshooting panel on the refrigerator compressor did have a light for low voltage, but we had missed seeing it because of the way the unit was mounted. We later helped some other cruisers figure out similar problems by knowing to look for this. One note though, to check for low voltage, all charging sources, such as your solar, wind, alternator, or generator, have to be off, typically for a half hour or longer. Thanks for listening to the Boat Galley Podcast. Never miss an episode. Subscribe today. And remember, if you're interested in my course, Eating Well with a Tiny Fridge, the link to it is in the show notes. I'll see you there.